Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books, coming to you today to celebrate Tag Tuesday on Wednesday, as usual. This time, I want to answer the 26 Random Questions tag, a series of questions put together by the booktuber David Murphy, questions that are really about everything but bookishness, mostly. So here goes. Question number 1, what was your most recent YouTube rabbit hole? To be honest, I can't even figure out how to watch BookTube as regularly as I like, so I try really hard to keep myself out of rabbit holes here. I did just spend several minutes trying to find a video link to accompany the next question, though, which is prompt number 2. What song is currently stuck in your head? Well, I've mentioned before that my son is a folk musician. Years ago, when he was still fairly young, he introduced me to Swap Your Love by Chris Wood and the English Acoustic Collective. It isn't an especially popular song, but it is, for my taste, one of the most sweetly romantic songs I know, as well as being just a little naughty. While the version I know is sung by just one singer, the lyrics are a back and forth between two different perspectives. I will leave a link for you down below. It's definitely worth a listen. The song manages to use the phrase, "You've got me, babe, and I've got you," successfully, which I would not have imagined to be possible at this point. And fundamentally, it's a song about marriage, and it makes me cry, even though it's a very happy song. The third question, what kind of music do you listen to the most? Well, I think the two most played albums of my life are Etta James and Bach Lute Suites. And I love to listen to my son's recordings, including the album he recorded with his high school bandmates. I'll leave a link to a couple of videos they recorded at live concerts, as well as a solo performance at his college. Question number 4, what is something you need to get better at? I need to figure out how to get more exercise while still getting my other work done. I spend a little too much time sitting at my desk or on the couch. The 5th question, do you set goals? What are your goals for the year? I don't set goals for particular time periods, really, but right now my major goal without time is to finish a draft, even if it's still quite rough, of a book I'm working on with David. We've been writing sections so far, and we've mapped out what we're hoping will work for a general structure. Still, there's a lot of work to do before we can quite really see where we're going, but things are starting to become a little clearer, I think. The 6th question, when was the last time you lost your temper? I can get snippy pretty quickly and pretty regularly, I guess, but I don't often totally lose my temper in a really huge way. When I do, it is exclusively with the people I love most. Fairly late in the summer, I had a total meltdown, the tales of which I am not going to share here, but it took me and the victims of my wrath a little while to recover our grounding. Question number 7. Do you swear too much? I swear very rarely. When I do, it's very occasionally done purely for humor. But not commonly, but definitely too often, I swear a bit when I'm in a heated argument, like in that meltdown I just mentioned, I'm sure. If anything, it must make me look stupid, not more serious. One of my best friends, though, is a really prolific swearer. In fact, she's one of the co-hosts of a baseball podcast, and she goes by the nickname Potty Mouth. I'll link to it below. Fairly recently, soon after the Wordle craze had totally struck, and imitations were cropping up all over the place, I introduced my friend to the knockoff version, Sweardle, and she started playing religiously. She's a total natural. Question 8. Do you spend too much money on shoes? I spend too much money on books, and maybe on scarves. I'm not a shoe fiend, and I don't buy a ton of pairs, but I do often buy kind of expensive shoes, given that I care so little for foot fashion. Birkenstocks and Dansko slip-on clogs are my main go-to shoes. I also love my Made in England classic Doc Marten dress shoes. Number 9, a bookish one. What is the worst book you've ever read? Presumed innocent, or at least I think that's what it was. And to be honest, the person who more or less dared me to read it let me DNF it when I told him after 25 pages or so who had committed the crime. And I read Portnoy's complaint all the way through and sorely wish I had not. Question 10. Are you a homebody or are you more adventurous? Definitely a homebody. Pandemic lockdown was made for me. Number 11. Do you take naps? Yep. I think I may need to at the halfway mark of this video, given how many questions there are. Okay, how about question 12? Have you ever been to Minnesota, the greatest state in the Union? I never have been. One of my best pals is from Minnesota, and perhaps I can convince her to take me sometime for a visit. Number 13. Have you ever tried to emulate someone? For a long time, I've set my father as the person to be a model for me. He was certainly not perfect, but he was a pretty amazing person. Some of my strengths were strengths of his. Some of my weaknesses were things he struggled with as well. He was far more visionary and far braver than I am. What I think makes him someone to emulate is that he combined my somewhat quiet demeanor with that bravery, making it seem at least kind of possible to approach in some way. I don't want to follow in his footsteps exactly, but I do hope his commitments and kindnesses will continue to help me chart my own way. Okay, half the questions down. So now we're on to question 14. What is the worst food you've ever eaten? Licorice. I can't even abide the smell of licorice from a distance. It makes me pretty intensely nauseated. There is a kind of trap, those beautiful roundish cookies covered in powdered sugar, which 90% of the time are almond or vanilla sometimes, but occasionally are licorice. I have to get my poison tester, and father of my child, to check my cookies before I take a bite. Number 15. Do you enjoy bars? What kind? Are you or have you been a regular at one? When I first read this question, I was thinking about granola bars. But yes, I was sort of a regular at 2 different bars. One we call our local pub, or just our local, and it serves not just beer and tap, but great falafel and stewed okra and other Middle Eastern delicacies, as well as hamburgers and the like. We haven't gone inside that place in 2 years now, although it was probably the last restaurant we were in. The second local bar I frequented is the post-work Thursday afternoon happy hour that my, quote, family has celebrated for years and years. The women of the family used to get together at our different houses, rotating each week, where we drank and ate snacks. Since the pandemic began, it's been mostly an online affair, but occasionally around a fire pit outside. Now, I started this with a crack about granola bars, but given how exceedingly leftist my little inside the DC Beltway suburban enclave is, which we'll get to later, perhaps we need to open an actual hippie, crunchy granola bar here in town. I think it would be quite a smash if we were not up against that beloved local pub mentioned at the beginning. 16. Have you ever been hungover? Nope. I'm no teetotaler, but I've never had a hangover. Question 17. Another readerly question. When was the last time you laughed out loud while reading? Weirdly, I cry a lot more when I'm reading than I laugh out loud, but I think I laughed loud about a momentarily funny Twitter post or something earlier today. When I'm reading along with other people, I try to keep my responses as quiet as possible. But I'm no silent reader when I'm alone in my study. 18. How would you label or describe yourself politically? Serious, hippie, lefty, socialist. My parents were both progressive activists, white Southerners in the 1950s and 1960s. But while I'm a lefty, and don't hide it, I'm a Southerner who will in general be nice even if you're a right-winger. Well, as long as you're a stranger. Interestingly, I manage to have political debates with my similarly liberal spouse almost every night, even though we disagree with only a hair's breadth of disagreement between us. Okay, number 19. What was the last movie you watched? Maybe Passing on streaming. I appreciated the movie, but I don't think I liked it nearly as much as many of my friends here on BookTube did, perhaps because I love the novella so much and have for so long. The last movie I saw in a theater was, I think, Little Women, right before things closed down. But again, the book is better. Question 20, which has a couple of parts. Do you want kids? Do you wish you had kids? I absolutely love being the parent of the cool, clever, and funny only child I have. I don't want any more than that. In fact, right as David and I started dating, actually before we started dating, just in one of those personal conversations pre-dating friends sometimes have, David asked how many children I wanted. I said 1. How many do you want? He said 4. I shook my head. 1. 3? 1. 2 at least? 1. 1, and then you'll reconsider? I laughed. David had already discovered that I pretty much never changed my mind about anything, so I laughed. Sure. 1, and then I'll consider more, and decide at that point that 1 is just perfect. The next part of the question is, if you have kids, give a piece of advice. 2 parts. As much as you can, let your child be who your child wants to be. Don't expect them to want to do what you do. And gracious, don't expect them to become what you didn't become yourself just to make up for whatever sense of personal failing you might be dealing with. Support them to realize their own dreams. And the second part of my answer is to make it really clear that you will love them no matter what. Yes, you will have arguments, and you will even say things you regret terribly. But apologize and make it clear that your love is not conditional, that no matter what choices they make, you will love them as people. And actually, since these are so serious, let me give one more, a little more lighthearted one. Before I ever had a kid, a parent friend of mine told me that she had a penny jar, and whenever she did some kind of poor parenting, she put a penny in the jar. Whatever money she raised as her children matured would go towards whatever therapy they needed to get over all of her mistakes. Seems like a great idea, partly because it can be a light and silly way to acknowledge your little daily mistakes, and partly because it's a way to get past them and know you want something better for your child, even when you screw up. 21. Do you get along with your siblings? Yes, I have just one sibling, and he is more than 7 years younger than I am, so we don't have that two-of-a-kind feel that I think some siblings have. But he is both very smart and very funny. I love to talk about books with him, in fact. And I am incredibly grateful to him for 2 things. His ability to talk about music with my son, and his ability to take care of our mother as she has gotten older and gone through some health issues, especially during the pandemic. Okay, question 22. What is a book you have serious issues with but love? This is a fascinating question, and I'm really stuck for an answer. Maybe I need to have a conversation with my spouse tonight and get back to you. He can always help me think of or remember this kind of thing. But I guess the larger question this brings up for me is how to balance books that have racist or misogynist or other elements we no longer condone, but which were written in an earlier age. Sometimes those now unacceptable elements seem like they were written with a certain kind of deliberate malice. But sometimes they don't at all. In fact, they might be trying to do the opposite kind of work. I think of To Kill a Mockingbird. I personally would never say that I have, quote, serious issues with it, but I understand why it might not be the perfect book to teach to young readers in today's world. Perhaps Huckleberry Finn would be a better example. I deeply love that book and appreciate the work against racism that Mark Twain was trying to do at the time he wrote it. But we understand race now in a way that can make Huckleberry Finn feel uncomfortable at the very least. The next question, 23. What is your favorite theme song to a movie and or TV show? This is ridiculous, but the one coming to mind right now is the opening to the British detective show Unforgotten. It always puts me in just the right frame for the show. I'm sure there must be others. Question 24. Do you like your job? If you switched careers, what would you do? Well, I used to be a history professor and a writer of academic history books that no one read. Then I was a full-time homeschooling parent. And then I had a year when I thought I was going back on the job market, but instead went through cancer treatment, etc. Eventually, before the pandemic, I taught online history and literature classes designed for international high school students, but that position did not really pan out, unfortunately. And then I became a book reviewer, and I'm combining that with doing some other writing, as I mentioned earlier. And I absolutely love this work, even though it barely pays. I don't write for huge, well-paying venues yet, and I don't currently have the ability to read and write quickly enough to earn my keep. That isn't essential for me right now, which is a huge blessing, and I'm going to try to develop my writing skills a bit more, at least for right now. The penultimate question is one I love. What is something you love about the city you live in? I live right outside of D.C., inside the Beltway, as people say, in a town created as a suburb mostly in the early 20th century, as an escape from the horrendous summer heat of the swamp that is D.C. It's a little higher. The town I live in, which really feels more like a neighborhood, since the whole region is wall-to-wall urban, is sometimes called the Berkeley of the East because of its history of lefty politics and activism. I love living in the D.C. area in general, partly for the amazing and often free museums, as well as the great theater scene here. I love Tacoma Park specifically because of its deep sense of being a real place, unlike so many suburban areas full of the same chains that we might see anywhere else. My town has its own very particular and very open and creative vibe. And the last question, who is your celebrity crush? My deep and passionate love for Ingrid Bergman will never die. And I have picked her out to play me in the docudrama about my life as well. Thanks for these great questions, David, and thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.